Hello again. Welcome to CIRC4 B Attempt. My name is Christian Williams. It is still October 12th of 2021. This program is fairly similar to the first one, but instead of using a set of pre-programmed instructions to move the servo, we are including a potentiometer for the B attempt. So potentiometer is basically just something that you can use that sends a variable voltage signal to the Arduino, and your Arduino can then decide to interpret that signal to mean various things based off what's mapped off of that. So to explain this a little bit more in detail, I actually have a link up here that we were using for our potentiometer. So the potentiometer, as you can see, kind of listed there, is this square right here. We have our voltage and our wiper and our ground. So the wiper is kind of like that sensor cord that I was explaining in attempt C. So however we wire this, we want to make sure that everything's wired up appropriately. So in this case, the center pin is going to be the sensor. Now my potentiometer here is actually set up so there's the wiper is in the middle of one side, and then the ground and voltage are on opposite corners on the other side. But the important thing is whatever pin the wiper is plugged into, that row is what we need connected to our pin, because that is our sensor. And then the power just kind of goes through that resistor, and twisting the potentiometer kind of increases and decreases the resistance, which the Arduino can sense because it's connected directly to the wiper, and then turn into something useful for us. So the program over here, you'll recognize some aspects from attempt C and some from some new ones. So we're still including the servo library in order for Arduino to understand how to use the servo. I've decided to rename the servo to Servo because I'm incredibly clever with my names. But we also have two new variables that we've set up. We have our potentiometer pin, which actually has to go to a different pin than we've been using. It goes into our analog pins, since we're creating a variable resistor. It's not a set thing, and it needs to be able to read that. And I put it into pin 3. I decided to move the servo to pin 3 and the analog to pin 3 just to kind of make it make more sense in my head for consistency's sake. We still have our integer position to start at 0, but we also need to create a new integer in order for our potentiometer to communicate, and we just set that to val for the value. Setup is the same. We've decided to tell the Arduino that our servo is connected to pin 3. And then our loop over here, we're doing an analog read, which we can do thanks to the analog line, to read the value of the potentiometer. The potentiometer itself has a value of anywhere from 0 to 1023. So what we need to do in order to make it sense in terms of degrees is we need to use a command called map. So map is going to map value, and it's going to which was at 0 to 1023, and instead map it to 0 degrees to 180 degrees. So it'll do the math and kind of roughly pin each of those values between a scale of 0 to 180. Basically makes that just easier for our servo to understand, because the servo doesn't have 1023 degrees to play with. Depending on whatever value it reads, it will then write to that servo with that new value, according to that scale value that we just created from 0 to 180. And then we have a delay of 15 milliseconds just to give the servo time to actually get to that angle. So what that looks like in real life here is this guy down here. So wiring is the same. I probably could have fit this potentiometer all the way over here, but I kind of wanted to use these jumper cables to see if that did anything interesting across the breadboard. It doesn't. So normally, let's start with the important part. Normally we've been using these series of pins down here. for most of the projects up to this point. But the Arduino also has a set of pins over here. In the past, we've just been using it to use our power and ground, but these are the analog pins in the back, and that's what allows it to actually take a reading of those pins and send a variable signal and so on. And that's what we need. These are the ports that we need to use for a potentiometer. So as you can see, we have in our analog 3, we have the yellow wire, which is connected up into our potentiometer. So the potentiometer's little pin is in this row here. As I kind of mentioned before, you can kind of see I have the power and ground right there. But then in the front underneath the middle here is where I actually have it plugged into, and that's our wiper. So we have them just connected power over here and then ground over here, going in, again in those same rows, but in the row where the wiper is plugged into, that's what's connected into analog 3 via the yellow cable. The servo, I didn't change anything wiring-wise. We still have the orange wire connected into the same row as the sensor. The only difference is we moved it to 3, so I could have 3 and 3 connecting to the servo. And that's our servo over there. And because it's waiting for a signal, you can see it's not moving or doing anything interesting. And that's because it's waiting for us to use this potentiometer, which you can actually remove the lever if you really wanted to, and cause the servo to freak out. But that little round piece has an arrow on it to kind of, just as a visual indicator of what degree it's set to. So if I twist this over here, you can see that's moved. And as I slowly twist it, you can see the motor twisting. And you can tell on the potentiometer that the potentiometer is actually moving more than 180 degrees, because the arrow is now pointing to the lower left instead of just directly across. But the servo treats that position as 180 degrees because of how we've mapped it. So it's not an exactly one-to-one, but you can still get pretty good control of what you need to do to get the servo to move. The reason why it's wiggling is because of inertia. So, but this isn't a physics class. So yeah, so that is my attempt B. We have added a potentiometer to get more direct control over our servo. And I will see you in attempt A.